So. Say it unless you mean it.
I do, yeah. I probably don't use it to the capacity. I don't have all the fancy stuff, but like I certainly prefer it to a stack of papers. So, and I am able to write on it. So I have confidence I can do that. So, yeah, it works.
I had too many tech glitches in my.
Oh, really?
career. I'll be writing notes and then I go to send it and I send a clean document.
Oh. See, that's even more than I would ever try to do. It's like, as long as I can access it for the meeting, that's all that matters.
Good morning, Ariana.
Good
We have a quorum.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Well,
I'll be wrong.
I'm very patient.
Do you recall who? Oh,
It's Anna.
Anna just texted.
Babies are white.
Yeah, she just texted. She just had a conflict show up. She'll be here at 10. Try to be here at 10. But yeah, she had something come up with Caballero's office, so. Okay,
Looks like Dave.
Dave, it's gonna be you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Just a quick question, do I read this large public comment statement as part of this thing?
you don't need to at this point. I think it's good to call the meeting.
Okay. Good, let's call the meeting to order at 9:01, November 4th, and 9 a.m. Okay, let's see if I have the right agenda. Okay. I guess roll call.
City of Delray Oaks.
Here.
City of Enfield. Here. City of Monterey.
Here.
City of Seaside.
Here.
City of Soledad.
Absent.
County of Monterey. Okay, so we do have a form.
Good. Public comment on matters not on the agendas. Members of the public may address the committee on any matter related to the jurisdiction of MSD, but not on the agenda. There's a time limit, not more than 3 minutes for each speaker. The public is encouraged to engage in respectful dialogue. It supports freedom of speech and values diversity of opinion. Failure to engage in respectful dialogue, respecting speakers being muted or required to leave. The committee will take action response immediately to any public comments presented. We may choose to follow up at a later time, either individually through staff or a subsequent agenda. Is there any public comment? Going once, twice. Okay. Consent agenda. I guess it's 31, this 31.
Yeah, just 3-1.
I'll move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Need to go to public comment, any public comment, seeing none. All in favor to approve,
Aye.
all opposed? Seeing none, approved. Action items, 4.1, review of administrative performances.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's I guess it's not necessarily a lot to report, but I guess that's because of good news. I mean, we just continue to grow our ridership and move our, the Better Bus Network is doing everything that we asked of it. If you look at page 13 of your monthly report, where it's the departures and disadvantaged communities, that was a big portion of what we wanted to do. You can see, a year ago, there was 21% of our departures were in the most disadvantaged communities, and now we're over 28%. So we continue to shift and grow ridership in the most disadvantaged portions of the community, which was the direction that your board gave when we adopted the Better Bus Network 2 years ago. And so it's just good to see that it's actually working as planned, and we're having the impact that we wanted to have. Elsewhere throughout the report, you can see that the impacts of getting closer to full employment. We're seeing less trips canceled, especially due to worker shortages. We're seeing our increased in continued increase in the reliability of our buses, and we're seeing decreases in the number of preventable accidents. So overall, good news to report on all fronts. So that concludes my report.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. 4.2, receive an update on state legislative activities and review the initial draft 2025 state legislative program. Ms. Obermeyer?
Good morning, committee members. Michelle Overmeyer, Director of Planning and Innovation here at MST. I'm joined by our Sacramento advocates on Zoom, Matt Robinson and Michael Pimentel, and they will give you an update on the latest in Sacramento. And then they will also present to you our draft 2025 state legislative program, which will be looking for feedback from you all. Matt and Michael.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us. I was just about to ask to have Michael unmuted, but it looks like he is out off of mute. Good to see everybody. I know you can't see us, but we will see you in person in the flesh in December at your December board meeting. So looking forward to connecting with you all then. In the meantime, the legislature is on recess and we'll be back on December 2nd after the election, which finally is happening tomorrow. We expect to see 30 plus new members in the California legislature when they convene in early December for their organizing session. We don't expect any changes in your delegation, and they will come in, as I mentioned, on the 2nd, just for that day where they will be sworn in, do a little bit of sort of housekeeping. Bills can start to be introduced that day. We probably will see a few, but I would not expect too many. And then they will return to their districts for the remainder of the month of December and the first week of January, reconvening for the real work of the session on January 6th. We had the legislative calendar come out in its draft form, so to speak. It's in the draft form until the legislature gavels in and adopts it. And on the calendar, we note that the bill introduction deadline for new legislation is February 21st, and that is important for something I will cover in the legislative program update. As we look ahead to next year in 2025, there's going to be a few things that MST is going to be involved in sort of globally in the legislature. One is really protecting all of the transit funding that we were able to secure back in 23. That is the money that is going out through the SB 125 process that is funding projects throughout the county. We had the legislature and the governor looking to reduce that funding or delay it this year. We had to fight pretty hard to maintain it. We ended up seeing more cap and trade money funding that work, plus some extensions of the expenditure years for those funds. And so we hope we're in a pretty good place, but given the state's fiscal situation, the fact that we're probably still going to be in a deficit when the governor puts his budget out on January 10th, we expect there will be some additional work that we will need to do with both MST and through the California Transit Association to make sure that the funding is retained for all of the purposes we're expecting it to be there for. The cap and trade extension is something that is also going to be, we believe, a focal point in Sacramento this year. That's important because we have quite a bit of transit funding that goes out on a continuous appropriation to agencies, both on a formula as well as a competitive grant program. And in recent cycles of that competitive grant program, MST has done quite well securing money for the SURF project, and more recently, as you'll see in your board report, for sort of rider ticketing and wayfinding systems that MST is implementing And so congrats to you all on that. But cap and trade will have to be extended before 2030. That is when the current authorization expires. We think 2025 is the sweet spot for that. I know it's 5 years early, but they are trying to do some things that will send some signals to the market that the program is going to be around. We also think Governor Newsom will want to make that part of his legacy, and nobody wants to touch it in election years. So 2025 seems like it's going to be the year we do the work to extend cap and trade. That could also mean, though, that some of the programs that we've come to rely on are looked at in more detail, and the legislature will have a conversation around whether or not it wants to maintain those programs as they stand today, make amendments to those programs, get rid of those programs. But one way or another, we will be working on behalf of our transit agencies to make sure that funding is retained for transit, because we are such a key element of the state's goal in terms of reducing emissions from the transportation sector for the very long term. And then finally, another thing that we've been working on, and we've updated you previously, I'm going to go ahead and hand it to Michael Pimentel, but that's the work of the Transit Transformation Task Force. That is going to be, I think, picking up a lot more steam in 25, and I'll turn it over to Michael to touch on that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And folks, good to be with you this morning. Did want to highlight for you that this Transit Transformation Task Force is one that was established by the California State Transportation Agency in December of 2023, pursuant to the budget bill that ultimately gave way to the SB 125 investments for this region. The group has been meeting every other month throughout the calendar year 2024 to develop a series of recommendations that are going to be ultimately included in a report delivered to the legislature in October of 2025. And so Matt noted work is going to be picking up. While conversations have been ongoing through that task force, the task force is now turning to formalizing the recommendations and are working toward a draft report of recommendations to be circulated in spring of 2025. It's notable that MST has participation on that task force. CEO Carl Sidorik is a task force member, has been working on your agency's behalf to elevate your interests, your priorities for that process, which will be far-reaching in its conclusions. He's also been working through the California Transit Association and their internal advisory committee to make sure that the industry and its recommendations to the task force reflect the interest of MST. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Matt to begin to take us forward on the discussion for your 2025 legislative program. So Matt, back to you.
Thank you. Michelle, if it's all right, I'm happy to stop there on sort of just the day to day and see if anybody has questions on the report that we just gave, and then we can segue to the legislative program.
Are there any questions from the committee members?
Just for reference, we're on page 11 of your agenda packet.
Okay. So there is no questions from the committee members wanting to continue, and then we'll get it at the end.
Thank you, sir. And as I mentioned, start getting those questions ready, because we'll be down there in December and are happy to take them then as you ponder some of the things we mentioned today. Moving to the legislative program, this is something that I believe most of you are familiar with. It's that time of year already where we try to set sort of the table for, what our big priorities are going to be in 2025 on behalf of you in Sacramento. I will just start by saying, unlike last year's program, which I think had more of a structural overhaul, this is largely the same. Some of these efforts are just frankly evergreen, like, opposing the bad bills, supporting the good ones, making sure that we are sort of coalescing along with stakeholders around those policy proposals and regulatory proposals that are important to transit. And so what I'm going to focus on is really the major changes that you will see in the report. And if there are questions about specifics, I think Michelle, Michael, and myself are happy to field those. The first thing you will come to under the support transit-related legislation is, I think, what is going to be a huge priority for the California Transit Association. And we have some more discussions upcoming, but this is really about protecting operators and protecting our passengers and trying to do more in state law that gives local agencies more tools, increases penalties for the bad passengers that may commit things like assault and battery against our drivers or our passengers. And this is being spearheaded by the California Transit Association in partnership with representatives from our labor side of the equation. And while we're sort of in the nascent stages of figuring out exactly what it's going to mean when we put a statute in place, I will know that those conversations have been happening since earlier this year, will continue to happen. In fact, I see Norman sitting there in the room. I will mention that at the Operations Committee of the California Transit Association's Fall Conference, which Norman chairs that committee, we are going to have sort of a brainstorming session, if you will, on what some of those policy proposals might look like. And we have invited our friends in labor to join us at that. And so as that takes shape, we will likely be coming back to the board in the early part of next year, and you'll see a support position on a piece of legislation once we have an author and a bill number. As we continue to move down under encourage the state to restore, preserve, and augment transportation and transit funding, that's under 3S. You'll see A there is try and find an author to sponsor legislation for the extension and potentially the increase of MST's current 8-cent countywide sales tax that supports your operations. Carl and the team have done some polling on that, and there is the necessary voter support, I will say, on either of those fronts, if that's something that ultimately MST's board decides it is ready to do and moves forward to the county voters in order to pass what would be the extension of that sales tax, if not some additional revenue for MST. Just as a reminder, that is something that would require a 2/3 vote of the electorate within the county of Monterey. But we do need to have an authorizing statute in the California codes in order to allow you to go back to the voters for that sales tax. And so we are starting to have some conversations with members of the MST delegation. And as those pick up steam, again, this will be something that we will keep you updated on as this moves forward throughout the rest of this year, as well as into next year. And that's why I mentioned that February 21st bill introduction deadline, because we would have to have it placed by them. Just continuing to move through, again, most of this is the same. We've sort of updated some things to speak to the task force that Michael Pimentel just talked about. We do expect to see some additional legislation in the local permitting slash potentially the CEQA front. You'll note that SB 922, well, frankly, SB 288 was a CEQA exemption statute that MST used for the SURF project. 922, I think, statewide helped clarify some things in that bill. We understand there are still some technical issues that have to get worked out as folks have worked through that SB 922 CEQA exemption process that frankly just need some, I think, some finer tuning in the law. And so that'll be an effort that I think some stakeholders are going to take on, including, as I mentioned, the California Transit Association will likely be leading that effort. And so we will, of course, seek feedback from MST as that proposal moves forward, because the SURF project is one of the largest projects that was built under that, or is being built, I should say, under that legislation. And so it will be important to sort of hear some of the lessons learned from MST as that moves forward. And then finally, I mentioned the sort of local permitting, TOD permitting issues. Really, the idea here is to see if there's a way to sort of, we've done it at the state level, right? And now it's like, how do we look at the local level, apply some of the lessons we've learned from our friends in housing and particularly affordable housing development, and see if there are any things that could be applied to transit projects that are supporting TOD as those move through both the state and local permitting processes. And so more to come on that. Again, everything else is largely the same as what you all approved last year at this time. And so with that, Michelle, I think I will hand it back to you. I've probably talked too much, and see if there's any questions on the program.
Thank you for that, Matt and Michael. I will also say that MST participates in the Interagency Legislative Task Force that TAMC puts together. So this time every year we meet with TAMC and the county, and we go over our respective programs to make sure they're all basically in alignment. So we were having that meeting on Friday. But at this time, we're happy to take any questions, comments, feedback that you have on this draft program.
I have a couple of questions, but any committee members have any questions?
Yeah.
Okay, my just simple questions are, it looks like the increase of the sales tax. I assume that's 2026, and does the legislation legislators have to approve that, and is there a timeline associated with that approval?
Carl, I'll sort of lead out, and if you'd like to add any flavor, please do. The short answer is we would need to have the authority in statute for MST as a special district to extend / potentially increase the sales tax. That I think the distinction that we want to make is it's just an authorization. It's not saying the legislature is hereby increasing your sales tax by 1/8 of a cent. The way it looks, meaning by when it has to happen, how long it runs for, those are things that can be included in the authorizing statute, so to speak. But ultimately, the decision of when to go for how long, that is up to the MST board and its partners and stakeholders. And I think I'll leave it to Carl to talk a little bit about the timing of when that might go on the ballot.
Thank you. Yes, so Measure Q expires in 2029. So we have the ability to renew, extend, perhaps remove any sunsets on Measure Q. But the thought was, if we're going to go through that effort, should your board decide to look at increasing another 1/8 of a percent in addition to Measure Q for our regular fixed route operations, we would need special legislation to do that. So this would set the stage if we get the legislation, which is the same authority that Santa Cruz Metro and a number of other transit operators already have. We would get that same authority through the state. Then it would be up to your board when the time is right, whether it's 26 or 28, to place an item on the ballot, and then to also make a decision whether it's for a simple renewal of Measure Q or if it's for a Measure Q plus. So this action and this language doesn't even get into that. It just gives you the authority later to place this on the ballot, should you choose to do so. So it's that's what we're talking about here.
Okay, then my other little question is, sometimes government moves very slowly, and on number I, you talk about streamlining. Is that just like a goal, a dream, a fantasy, or is there any meat potatoes to that?
Well, you know, it is yes, it's all of those things. But I think it is so there's a disconnect between the state goals, funding, resources, cap and trade, and other funds and even federal funds that have been allocated to these projects, especially greenhouse gas reducing and transit enhancing projects. We have policies from federal and state sources and a real push to make these projects happen. Yet our other states and local jurisdictions they can't seem to get out of the way in the permitting process to get us through to breaking ground sooner rather than later. So there are moves afoot in Sacramento to try to find out, are there ways to, are there one-stop permitting tools that could be used. There are a number of these types of things being discussed, so we want to be at the table with those discussions, particularly when it comes to these priority projects as deemed by the state and the federal government. How do we move these projects along faster? Because it's taking too long to deliver too little for too much money.
Good. So thank you so much for your time. I think we'll move on
This
to
message was approved by Carlson.
4.3, receive, do we ask for?
I do have a question for our state, and I'm sorry, I'm staff, I should have known this. But something came up at the task force on Monday after this was mailed out, so give me that leniency, if you will. But what came out during the task force was something that I wasn't completely aware of. But under the Surplus Lands Act, transit districts are treated differently than other special districts, in that there are other special districts have the ability to do more with their surplus lands than transit districts. They are singled out for whatever reason. And Matt, is there any legislation moving that we need to maybe be conscious of or make reference to in a final draft of this that refers to equity for transit operators under the Surplus Lands Act?
So, I'm gonna answer your question a couple different ways. I hope you don't mind. So first of all, you're right, that there is a prohibition essentially on special districts that operate transit or transportation systems from capitalizing on their property unless, well, I'm gonna say as defining it as an agency's use, which is essentially saying you can ignore the Surplus Lands Act. If you want to call it an exempt piece of property, then you have to go through this planning process where you're setting aside a certain percentage of the land you own for affordable housing, and it's, you know, a longer path to being able to monetize your property to help fund your transit operations. So there is a pretty clean fix to that, which we attempted in a bill that was sponsored by your former senator, Ana Caballero. And we only got so far before I'll say the housing groups and some others at the state level were moving against us. And so we had to go through this process of negotiating a solution, which is essentially the thing that we landed on under the exemptions process. So having said all that, Carl, if CalSTA truly were to put this at the top of their priority list for ways to try to help transit agencies generate more operating funding, we would absolutely need to see another bill move through the legislature to essentially strike that prohibition, as was attempted by Senator Caballero. But given that the dust is still settling on the last bill, which was only in 2023, I don't know that that's something that's going to come around next year. I do believe, though, Michelle, if I'm not mistaken, we had some cover. We have some cover, excuse me, in the program. Carl, I will take a closer look to make sure that it's adequate. And I'd also note that we supported Ms. Caballero's effort, which was, as I mentioned, ran in 2023 as an agency. So more to come, but I hope there is some positive movement in terms of amending the Surplus Lands Act to better benefit your agency and others.
Thank you. And the only reason I ask is if things start moving quickly, staff always refers back to this policy document to determine whether we can send a letter of support or not. And so I just want to make certain that it's clear and your board understands what direction you're giving us so that when it's time to move, if we need to move quickly, it's cleared out. And I think Matt used the term provide cover. So staff is always interested in cover.
Thanks.
Do we need to approve the report or just move on?
We were just taking any feedback. We'll finalize the
Okay.
program and bring it to the full board next month.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yes, Carl, on this question of potential legislation for 2025 on the additional 1/8 sales tax, what would that put us at if we were to trigger that in the future? And I know we have two election cycles to
Right.
consider. 2026, 2028 is cutting it close, but that's the next presidential election. I think an extension, I think we've shown that we use those fundings for its intended purposes. I think that's an easy argument to make, extending it and removing a sunset. But I think when we get closer, if this legislation were to pass, obviously polling, see where voters are at. But every county has their cap, so this would put us at what percentage with an additional 1/8? And where would that put Monterey County compared to other counties?
It would put us 1/8 over the cap. And I don't know where it would put us in regards to other counties, although I know in the San Francisco Bay Area and LA County, they're well over the cap by, several percentages, but we're not that.
Right.
So what about comparable counties?
Yes.
I don't have the information yet for that because we're not ready to even move there yet. We're just looking to get, legislation or parity with Santa Cruz, who in this last session was able to get the same legislation for them. And they're looking at perhaps placing something on the ballot next year. We're a little bit behind them on that.
Next year or 2026?
2026, I'm sorry, 2026. So we're a little behind them on the legislation allowing it, but we haven't, other than the polling or initial polling that says, yeah, it's possible. But, it's much closer for the additional eighth. We're right at that 2/3 in the last polling that we did, whereas just extending it, we're well above the 2/3. So, what we're asking for is let's get the state authority to do so. And if the polling comes in and it looks good, then we're ready to move. If not, do not put, my advice to you is don't put forth a measure that's not going to win.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And so this will put this potential bill on our platform. So we still, after doing that, then you would or reach out to John Laird or Don Addis to be potential authors or co-authors on it.
that is correct. And we've actually had some preliminary discussions with Addis saying that this is something we might be looking at if we can get our board to indicate this is what they want to do. So that's where we're at. We haven't had any meetings yet, but we're trying to get some calendar depending on how things go.
Yeah. I'm good with that.
Thank you. Item 4.3, receive an update on federal legislative activities and review the initial draft 2025 federal legislative program. Carl?
Yes, we have our representative in Washington, D.C., Don Gilchrist, on the call. And Don can give us an update about how well things are working with our federal legislative program. Could be a short presentation.
Yeah, good morning. Yes, Chair, members of the committee, Don Gilchrist with Thomas Walters and Associates. And pleased to be able to talk to you about your federal program and your platform for next year. On the federal level, everyone's watching to see what happens tomorrow. Congress is in recess until November 12th, when everybody will come back for a lame duck session. And it's fair to say that the election results are going to have a big impact on determining what happens in the lame duck session. The continuing resolution is keeping the federal government open until December 20th. That provides a very limited window for them to finish things up, especially the FY25 appropriations bills. Procedurally and politically, it's a very difficult path forward. House Republicans have been pushing for cuts in non-defense spending all year. That's a non-starter, but it does matter because they will have a majority for the rest of the year, regardless of what happens on Tuesday. And that means they can control what comes up for a vote in the House. Hopefully things will come together on some sort of a compromise. It will probably look something like the Biden budget, which proposes an increase in discretionary spending of 1% or so. But if that does not happen, Congress could just as easily decide to punt again until next year and extend the continuing resolution into the spring. If you could advance to the next slide. And the next slide, please. I'll just say the focus in the lame duck is going to be on the appropriations process, but there's a number of other things that will be in play. And particularly disaster relief funding is needed. FEMA has enough money right now, but they will need a lot more. And some of the other programs like the Small Business Administration Loan Program are out of money and they can't wait much longer. So I think at the very minimum, there'll be some sort of disaster supplemental. And we're hoping that that will help other things to coalesce into a larger package where some things can get done. Next slide, please. Just want to review what the transportation funding issues are for MST and the Lame Duck Congress. Most of your federal funding is provided by formula programs, and those are intact and not threatened by the debate and division in the federal appropriations process. Both the House and the Senate bills would fully fund those transportation formula programs. However, there are spending cuts being proposed in the area of transportation grants, in the area of multimodal programs, some transit programs, and rail programs. There are proposals to reduce the annual funding that goes to those programs. So that's where the fight will be for us in the lame duck Congress for your programs. Just to note that Senator Padilla and Senator Butler were successful in adding $1 million to the Senate bill for your King City facility to fund some hydrogen retrofits there. So we want to see that bill come to the point where it gets enacted, so that money has a chance, and we'll be fighting to keep it in the bill as we go forward. Just also want to note that support for the SURF project has been a major federal issue for MST this year, and Mr. Sidorik and his staff have invested a lot of effort in this, and we've been working with them trying to obtain a small starts grant agreement from FTA before the end of the year, and we're just continuing that in the closing months of this year. Next slide, please. Just looking at next year and what your federal platform will need to address. We'll know a lot more tomorrow, right? The election results will determine a lot of what we will be working on in 2025. It could very well be that we're continuing to try to finish up the current year bills. Beyond that, there will definitely be a need to increase the national debt, and that's always controversial. We want to watch out for any strings that get attached to that bill that could harm you. If one party were to sweep the election results tomorrow, that might set up a possibility of a budget reconciliation process. That's the expedited procedure that allows the Senate to actually do things occasionally, but you need to have pretty much one party controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House for that to happen. If budget reconciliation does happen, we'll be aggressively engaging in that. But with everything so close, it's quite possible that we end up with a divided government, and that will mean another year of difficulty and delay. But I just want to note that in the area of transportation programs, that's one of the few areas where there are a lot of bipartisan interest and support for doing things. And so even in a divided government, we're still able to make some progress on transportation issues. Next slide, please. Just want to talk about your platform a little bit more to say that it has stood up very well to guide your advocacy program. No major changes are really needed to allow you to continue to engage on a federal level. And so we're looking at a lot of continuity for your goals and your priorities. And regardless of what happens on election day, I think your platform is going to be an excellent guide for your advocacy next year. And this includes supporting federal program funding, but also seeking specific grant funding for MST projects. I do think we will be continuing the congressional earmarking process next year. That's something MST will continue to seek funding through since it's an important opportunity. The one really big difference next year is that we'll want to begin lobbying on surface transportation program reauthorization. That's the multi-year legislation that sets the funding levels and the policies and the programs for highway programs, transit, and rail, and also highway safety. So it's a pretty big deal. The current legislation will not expire until late 2026, but we need to get started next year to make sure that MST's priorities are heard at the highest level. This will probably be a process that takes several years to complete, but we cannot afford to fall behind by not engaging early in 2025. So that'll be something I'll be working closely with Mr. Sidorik and your staff on, and any opportunities that we have to leverage advocacy by board members and staff will be working closely with you on that. I'll conclude there and see if you have any questions about federal issues or the federal platform that you're looking at.
If any board members have any questions? Okay.
Don, I just wanted to speak on one of the items that you have on the list there, and that was just a disaster relief reimbursement, as that's becoming a bigger issue for special districts, for counties, cities. But I heard that there wasn't funding. I think back in September, there was some media coverage saying that FEMA was going to stop reimbursing because they were only funded enough to cover any disasters with for anticipated hurricanes, and that was before all the big hurricanes hit. So there's from that news coverage, it seemed that they were not fully funded, and that's why they stopped reimbursing local governments for claims that they've had going back 5-7 years. I think Monterey County, I think we're owed at least $70 million. Santa Cruz County is owed $100 million. And so this is a big item for us, that we used a lot of reserves thinking that we were going to get reimbursed for most of that. Sometimes we only get reimbursed 75% of the claims, sometimes maybe even less, but that seems to be a big issue, not only for our local counties, but across California.
Thank you for that question. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify my comment. Yeah, FEMA, to start out, FEMA is excruciatingly slow in reimbursing. So what you're describing is I would say a chronic issue with that agency. As you noted, it became even worse in the fall when they put into place their policy that says we're only going to be addressing imminent threats to life and safety, and we're not going to be reimbursing anybody from previous disasters. That was very difficult for local governments such as yours. Now that policy has been lifted, and that is because the continuing resolution included a provision to free up money for FEMA. I describe it as it didn't really appropriate money for FEMA, but it gave them the authority to spend faster. So they're spending a full year's amount of money, even though it hasn't been appropriated yet. That's as best as I can do to explain it. The bottom line is that FEMA was freed up $20 billion for the disaster relief fund. And that is sorely needed to respond to the hurricanes. Supposedly, they're also able to use that to do some reimbursements from previous disasters. So they did lift the policy of not doing that. But it's pretty clear they're going to need tens of billions of dollars more to really address the needs of your city and all the other cities and counties and states that are impacted. There's a lot of reimbursements that are still out there to be done. So I think we'll see an appropriation to add additional money to the disaster relief fund, and hopefully that would speed up the process to help your jurisdiction and others that are long overdue for the reimbursements.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to 4.4, receive an update on future contactless payments, including discounts for CalFresh and/or SNAP cardholders. Michael Coleman, there.
Good morning. Michael Coleman, Chief Information Officer for Monterey Salinas Transit. I believe I have a slide. Pick on my own staff here in a minute.
You want me to pick on them?
We did not receive the slide.
You didn't? Hold on real quick. If we don't, the slide's not very sophisticated, but.
Meanwhile, I'll tap dance a little bit for my part. So the reason I asked Michael to do this presentation today is that our contactless program continues to grow. Since it implemented in May of 2021, we've tripled the number of transactions and tripled the number of actual users who are using contactless payment. We have recently, or in the past years, working with our partners at the state, California Department of Technology, have opened up the ability for users to register their credit card or debit card to receive half-price discounts if they're a senior or if they're a veteran. We're still working on a way to automate the disability eligibility verification, but that's coming. We're looking at implementing the contactless payments on the MST Rides program. And we have some opportunities to offer additional discounts to lower income people in our community through state programs. And Mike will talk a little bit more about that now.
He gave,
How's that for
he
filling?
gave the big summary. All right, yeah, so, we'll kick right in. So summarizing, where we were from where we are today, roughly about a year ago, August, we deployed what I would call the production system of our contactless payment system. So basically, it was deployed in all of our main route buses. It was put out there, and with roughly a year under our belt as of August and September, we're averaging about 15,000 customer interactions with the devices per month. 3,000 of those are unique customers. About 37% of the transactions are actually capped, and they're getting automatic discounts. We're finding the devices are very reliable. Really, we're seeing a less than 2% failure rate in the devices in the last 12 months. That amounts to about 4 devices that failed mechanically out of the entire fleet. We have nearly across the board support for all the major credit card providers. They can use Visa, they can use MasterCard, they can use their Apple phone, they can use their Android phone. And as of this summer, they can actually manage their trips with an actual Monterey Salinas Transit instance on Google Wallet. So if they went in Google Wallet and set it up, you would see our logo, they would be able to track their trips, they would be able to see their rides, to be able to see their discounts. As of the last 2 weeks, we're actually in the final stages of adding Discover. It is being actively tested on our devices with our technology team. There are a few bugs to work out, but I expect actually this month we'll probably be going at least soft live with that and probably full live by the end of the year. Customers can actually use login.gov to register for senior and veterans discounts as well. That's been in place and that's working. Next slide, please. So with all that in place, what are we looking to do for 2025 and why are we bringing it up for the performance board today? Our next big step will actually be deploying the devices on our rides and paratransit system. The devices have been ordered. I am anticipating that we will physically receive the additional devices by the end of this year. The technology staff will begin rolling them out and installing them on the vehicles in early 2025. We will begin soft testing in the spring of 2025 with a rollout push shortly afterwards. Another thing we're looking at very hard that we're seeing observationally on our vehicles is what I would call a family or multi-fare tap. Right now, if you get on our bus and you basically tap it, because of the design of the tapping system, it won't accept another tap for 2 hours because we don't want to double charge customers. So when they tap it, if they tap it again within that period of time, our system basically ignores that. It creates a challenge from a programming standpoint, basically, that if somebody wants to pay for their family, if somebody wants to pay for additional people, there's not an easy way to do that. We are currently in talks with our vendor. We're currently in talks in Cal ITP about how do we design an option on the system that would give somebody the ability to easily do that. That's a high priority for next year. We are working on student fares validation. We have a grant application in process. That grant application is in conjunction with Cal ITP and a development company called Compiler. We are loosely partnering with Hartnell College on that for potential in 2025. And the idea would be to design a system that basically takes the student discounts that we already use in place in our legacy system and begin to port it over to the tap to pay system where a student would only have, just like senior citizens or just like veterans, it would just be a simple act of tapping and we would know automatically behind the scenes that they're entitled to a student discount. Hopefully we'll be testing that in 2025. Last but not least, American Express support. American Express is the last remaining major credit card vendor that we do not have validation with. We are actively talking to them at this time. The plan is actually to begin that process of testing and getting ready to deploy American Express once Discover is tested and proven. Last slide, please. So as you look at the big picture on this, the real push is going to be transitioning off our current fare media and our current systems to get the solutions that are compatible with tap to pay. Even at 15,000 roughly taps a month, we need to improve that almost by an order of magnitude. It's got to come way up to begin that transition to where we can remove our legacy systems. And the one that actually kind of led to this presentation today is that we've been approached by Cal ITP and we've been approached by the state of California about the potential to add discounting for California Golden State Advantage recipients. There are two pieces that we're looking at and working on in this point from a concept standpoint that technologically we should be able to deploy. One would be implementing a solution that pretty much is exactly the same as we're providing for senior citizen veterans. Somebody who was a California Golden State Advantage recipient for any reason whatsoever would be able to go to login.gov. They would be able to register. Once they have registered, they'd be able to choose a payment device. And should the board decide to approve this, or should the board decide to implement this fare structure, we would offer those folks the same discounting structure that we'd be offering veterans and senior citizens. There's also another piece which is a little bit longer term, but since we're in discussions about it and it looks like there's a real possibility we could do it, I did want to bring it up with the performance board today in anticipation of discussing this next year, which is New York State is actually piloting a program with one of their transit agencies at this point where EBT cards can be directly tapped on a bus. So an EBT recipient can board one of their buses in the Albany area at this point. They can tap and they can actually pay using that card and they can actually get the discount structure using that card automatically. Technologically, based on early discussions we're having with Cal ITP and with the folks who are managing the back end process of our system, we believe this can be done in the state of California, and MST is working with them to explore that as a potential option. So with that, that's where we're headed. So the EBT discussion is something obviously that would require board consideration and approval. And I did want to let people know as we got into the end of the year that that's kind of coming in the pipeline. The anticipation is that as we research this and get more detail, we probably would have a discussion with the full board early next year.
Thank you. Is there any question by board members? Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's interesting on the EBT pilot, but would that require the legislature to make that change to be able to use EBT benefits, which were for food, right?
They would not be able to use the benefits specifically for food without a legislation change.
Right.
So if it basically what the state of New York is doing at the moment, from what I've been able to find out, is that like California, they actually load multiple funds onto those EBT cards. So some of those funds, as you pointed out, are food benefits, but there are other benefits and other cash that is available on the card. Without a legislative change, it would be restricted to that other bucket.
So, in order to do this, it would require state legislation as well. So this would be something like us or the Transit Association would have to.
Or Caltrans itself.
Yeah.
Through so it's the California Integrated Travel Program is a department or a division in Caltrans, a department for the hierarchy. But they're interested in pursuing this. They may seek a demonstration. They may ask us to be the demonstration like we were before. There are 40,000 EBT residents in Monterey County. So very likely the demographic matches well with who's already riding our buses. We already provide, they may already be getting a discount for some other reason. So we've looked at it internally. That's something that if your board is interested in us pursuing, we don't think it would have a dramatic effect on our revenue. It's just really, do we want to spend the technological resources to do that? It's an intriguing idea and certainly melds well with our vision of, connecting communities, creating opportunity. So it's just more to come on that. And the other question is, if you haven't asked, how are you getting bank cards into the hands of people who may not have bank accounts? We're working with the state to promote. There is a product called Bank On that a number of banks, they're low cost, low fee bank accounts for people who may not be able to meet the minimum balance. And there are a number of banks that, it's called the Cities for Financial Empowerment Program, and Mechanics Bank and Golden West Credit Union and a number of other banks in our region offer these tools. So we're going to work together and do some promotion of that so that people who may not know they can get a credit card or debit card find out that maybe they can, because there's a misconception out there that not everybody can get a credit card, and it may be more affordable than people know. So we're trying to promote those programs as well.
There's a couple things that are on the burner that admittedly even in just the last week since I created this presentation, they've actually crossed my desk. LA Metro is piloting a program where they're basically doing a preloadable bank card that is restricted only to transportation related purchases. So it can only be used for transit, it can only be used for rail, it can only be used for bike share. We're trying to have discussions with them to find out if maybe that has a piece to fit in, into the MST ecosystem. I actually, honestly, and I think I'm not the only one that's involved in this program that believes this, I see 2025 as being something of a critical mass year for this program, not just at our agency, but at many agencies.
Well, I just want to say I support those efforts to promote other alternative forms of banking at low cost.
Yeah.
That could also help our goals, but certainly MST has always been a leader with your leadership to look at innovative ways to be able to give these discounts to low-income residents, but to be able to utilize existing technology to make their lives easier utilizing transit.
Yeah, what we found is that early on in this program, when we were putting out the Visa Cash App card for people who can't get a traditional bank card, 90% of the new enrollments in Monterey County when we offered that was their first tap was on an MST bus. 90% of those went on to use that card at a grocery store or at a retail store. So we know that once they get the card in their hand, it's you call it a tool of financial empowerment. They don't have to rely on cash all the time. They can use their debit card as a tool. They don't have to carry the cash with them, which is a safety issue. So yeah, we're continuing to pursue that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So very much. Okay. Seeing nothing else on the agenda, I'd like to adjourn the meeting at 9:56.
Okay, see you in 5.
Thank you.
Get more coffee.
More coffee.